Usually when we think about power, we picture something really physical, like something tangible.
Right, like a locked door or a uniform.
Exactly, a uniform or, a gavel coming down in the courtroom. We picture someone literally standing there, physically telling us what we can and cannot do.
Yeah, it's very binary. You are either physically constrained or you aren't.
Right. And it's a very visible, very comforting way to understand how the world works, I think.
Yeah.
Because you can see the boundaries.
Sure, the rules are obvious.
But then you start to really look at how society actually functions day to day, and suddenly that physical architecture of power just kind of vanishes.
It really does. You realize you're looking at a landscape of control that is entirely invisible.
Yeah, operating right inside our own heads. We're looking at the forces that shape our behavior when no one is watching, and, well, the forces that shape our societies when everyone is watching.
Which is really the core tension driving the research we are analyzing today.
Yes, exactly. So for you listening, today's deep dive is all about unpacking this really fascinating, highly interdisciplinary essay from podcaster.capital. The site with the distinct orange and gray PC logo.
Right. And the essay is titled From Self-Policing to Liberation, Surveillance, Social Control, Homophobia, Conversion Therapy, and the Continuing Legacy of Jesus of Nazareth.
It is a massive title and a massive topic. But the mission for this deep dive is to get through all that depth without the overwhelm.
Exactly, because at its core, the essay explores this profound, ongoing struggle that has basically defined human civilization for centuries.
It really has. I mean, on one side, you have institutions, right? Governments, cultural traditions, religious structures.
Yeah, and those institutions inherently seek order. They want predictability. They literally need stability to function.
Right. But then, on the other side of that equation, you have individuals. You have communities fighting for things that constantly disrupt that order.
Things like freedom, dignity, self-expression, and ultimately liberation from oppression.
And I have to say, the essay itself comes with this piece of artwork that just perfectly captures this collision. It's so striking.
Oh, the collage. Yeah, it's incredible.
So imagine this striking collage split right down the middle. On the left side, you have this cold, metallic, almost futuristic city.
Very dystopia.
Very. It's dominated by these giant, imposing surveillance cameras looking down from these high-tech buildings. It feels sterile, heavily monitored, almost suffocating.
Yeah, it gives you that really watched feeling. But then on the right side of the collage, it transitions into this incredibly vibrant, warm, chaotic scene.
Exactly. It's a diverse, modern crowd. People carrying protest signs, holding up pride flags, and walking right alongside them in the dead center of it all is Jesus of Nazareth.
It's just a brilliant visual synthesis. You have the ultimate representation of institutional control and surveillance on one side.
Right.
And then the ultimate representation of grassroots human liberation, compassion, and resistance to hierarchy on the other.
And that image is basically going to be our roadmap for this deep dive. We are going to journey from those cold, mechanical mechanisms of societal control right through to the messy, beautiful fight for personal liberation.
It's quite a journey. And to understand how societies suppress freedom, we kind of first have to understand how they maintain order without using physical force.
Right, because they can't just lock everyone up.
Exactly. And that starts from within our own minds with the concept the source material calls self-policing.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the best way I can conceptualize this is the empty highway scenario.
Oh, yeah, that's a perfect analogy.
Right. So it's 3 a.m, you're driving, and there isn't a single car in sight. There were absolutely no police around.
Total isolation.
Yeah. But when you switch lanes, you still use your turn signal. Like, the rule isn't being enforced by anyone outside of you, but the rule is living inside your head.
That captures the outward behavior perfectly. But we really need to look at the psychological mechanism driving it. Self-policing is basically the process through which individuals regulate their own behavior without any direct external enforcement.
I mean, I guess that makes sense. We do it all the time.
We have to. From a sociological standpoint, societies absolutely depend on this. I mean, if a society had to rely purely on coercion...
Like a police officer on every single corner.
Right. Or a teacher hovering over every student, a tax auditor in every living room, the system would just collapse under its own weight.
It would be economically impossible.
Yeah.
And just socially unbearable.
Exactly. So self-policing is highly efficient. It builds social trust.
But wait, if self-policing is so essential, why does the essay frame it as part of this, sinister architecture of control? I mean, using a turn signal or not stealing a candy bar seems like basic social trust, not oppression.
That's a really good point. But the danger emerges when we look at what exactly we are internalizing. It's not just traffic laws.
Okay, so what else is it?
We internalize societal judgments, moral panics, and behavioral norms. From the very moment we are born, we are subject to this intensely layered conditioning process.
Right, like how parents teach toddlers to suppress outbursts.
Exactly. And then schools train children to sit still, face forward, and raise a hand to speak, which historically is essentially training for factory or office work.
Oh, wow. I never really thought about raising your hand like that.
Yeah. Religious communities dictate moral conduct. Workplaces establish quote-unquote professionalism.
Right.
And over time, these external expectations burrow so deeply into our psychology that they become completely automatic. We actually stop asking if a rule is fair or ethical or even necessary.
We just obey it to avoid the friction of nonconformity because we fear social ostracization.
Exactly.
So the line between healthy social cooperation and rigid, oppressive conformity is essentially invisible. I might think I'm just being a good citizen, but I might actually be suppressing core aspects of my own identity just to avoid making waves.
And that psychological vulnerability is exactly what large-scale institutions exploit. Because when you scale self-policing up to a structural level, you get one of the most influential theories of social control ever conceived.
The Panopticon.
Yes, the Panopticon.
I remember reading about this. Jeremy Bentham, right? An 18th century philosopher. He designed this conceptual prison.
He did, and the architecture is brilliant in a really terrifying way.
So, picture a circular building. The cells are all arranged in a ring on the outside. And right in the dead center of the circle is a single observation tower.
Right, and the crucial architectural mechanism of the Panopticon is asymmetric visibility.
Asymmetric visibility. What does that mean in this context?
Well, the central tower has blinds, or the guard inside is shadowed, while the cells on the outer ring are backlit by exterior windows.
Oh, I see. So the guard in the central tower can see every single movement of the prisoners.
Exactly. The prisoners cannot see into the tower.
They literally never know if the guard is actually looking at them at any given moment.
Right. The guard might be drinking coffee, taking a nap, or the tower might be completely empty.
But because the prisoner might be watched at literally any second, they have to assume they are always being watched.
Precisely. The physical force of the prison guard is entirely replaced by the psychological weight of potential observation.
Wow.
Because the surveillance is potentially constant, the inmates behave as though observation is always occurring. They basically become their own guards.
It is maximum efficiency for the institution. You need far fewer guards because the prisoners are policing themselves.
Exactly. But the essay argues this isn't just an 18th century prison blueprint. It brings in the French philosopher Michel Foucault.
Right, Foucault. And he basically took Bentham's design and said, this is the blueprint for all of modern society.
He did. Foucault argued that modern institutions operate through observation, classification, and normalization.
Okay, observation I get. But explain those last two. Classification and normalization. Why do institutions care so much about making us normal?
Because normal is predictable, and predictable populations are easy to govern.
Yeah.
Foucault observed this major historical shift. In the Middle Ages, power was a public spectacle.
It was very visible.
But in the modern era, power became hidden. It moved into the architecture of institutions. Think about how a modern school operates.
Okay.
A school observes a student, classifies their intelligence through standardized testing, and then normalizes them against a bell curve.
Oh, I see where this is going. Yeah, we do the exact same thing in the workplace. We evaluate employees with performance metrics, key performance indicators. We track their screen time, their keystrokes.
We're constantly establishing a baseline of normal productivity and punishing anything that deviates.
So Foucault realized that the Panopticon had broken out of the prison. We are constantly being observed, measured against a baseline, and classified by the state, by corporations, by medical institutions.
Yes, everywhere.
Okay, so I see where Foucault was going with this in the 20th century, but what about right now? The source essay specifically mentions the digital age and algorithms.
It does.
So what does this all mean for our phones? Are algorithms the new central tower? Because I got to say, I have to push back a little here.
Go for it.
Bentham's prisoners were locked in a stone cell. If I feel like my social media algorithm is manipulating me or my smart TV is listening to me, I can just turn it off. I can delete the app. Is it really Panopticon if I can opt out?
Well, can you really opt out, though?
I mean, technically, yes.
Technically.
Yeah.
But the source material would argue that the infrastructure of modern life has made true opting out virtually impossible without accepting severe social and economic marginalization.
Okay, that's fair.
I mean, can you apply for a job without an email address? Can you navigate modern professional networking without a LinkedIn profile? Can you really participate in modern social life without a smartphone?
Probably not without a lot of friction.
Right. The digital panopticon isn't built of stone. It's built of convenience and necessity.
Okay, yeah, if I delete all my apps, I become a digital hermit, which is its own form of social death.
Exactly. And look at the mechanism of the algorithms themselves. When you scroll on your phone, an algorithm is literally timing how many milliseconds you linger on a specific post.
Milliseconds. That is terrifying.
It is. It is observing you, classifying your psychological vulnerabilities, your political leanings, your insecurities, and then feeding you content subtly designed to nudge your behavior. It is the ultimate invisible guard.
And the self-policing kicks in immediately. We curate our own lives for the digital watcher. We don't post certain opinions because we fear the algorithm will suppress them or the social media mob will judge us.
We internalize the algorithm's preferences.
Wow. This creates a monumental challenge for modern society. We have to balance legitimate security needs, the genuine convenience of global interconnectedness, with our fundamental human need for privacy and autonomy.
It's a massive balancing act, and if we don't even realize the central power is there, we can never question the authority of the guard inside it.
Right. That dynamic, the feeling of being constantly watched by an invisible system, creates a really fascinating, kind of terrifying psychological environment.
It really does.
So if the Panopticon relies on everyone feeling watched by the overarching system, what happens when everyday people decide to take on the role of the watchers and the enforcers themselves? When does the prisoner in the cell next to you decide they are the guard?
That transitions us into one of the most volatile intersections of law and psychology discussed in the source.
Yes, the concept of the citizen's arrest. This is where individual responsibility violently collides with state authority.
It's a very messy collision.
I've always found citizen's arrest to be such a bizarre legal relic. It sounds like something straight out of the Wild West.
It does feel archaic.
My understanding is that it basically allows private individuals to temporarily detain someone they suspect of committing a serious offense until actual law enforcement arrives. Why on earth does a modern legal code still permit this?
Well, to understand the modern law, you have to look at the historical mechanism that created it. The source provides some really crucial context here.
Okay, let's hear it.
Historically, maintaining public order wasn't exclusively the government's job. Professional, organized, taxpayer-funded police forces are a surprisingly recent invention in human history.
Really? I guess I just assumed they were always around.
Not at all. If you go back a few centuries, if a crime occurred in a village, the community had to respond. The state simply didn't have the reach or the manpower.
Right. I mean, if someone steals a horse, you can't wait 3 weeks for a magistrate to arrive from London. The town has to deal with it right then and there.
Exactly. The legal concept evolved from sheer necessity. Citizens possessed a mutual obligation toward community safety. It was sometimes legally codified as the hue and cry.
The hue and cry, what is that?
It was a rule where every able-bodied person was literally required to join the pursuit of a criminal if the alarm was raised.
Oh, wow. But dropping that historical necessity into a modern urban environment seems incredibly reckless.
Oh, it absolutely is.
Here's where it gets really interesting, where I have a major question. Isn't there a massive danger here? If we encourage everyday people to police each other today, aren't we just inviting absolute chaos?
Yes.
I mean, people are terrible eyewitnesses, they are incredibly reactive, and frankly, they carry a lot of biases.
The text highlights this exact modern controversy. It validates your question perfectly. The debate really hinges on the tension between community response and the severe risks of decentralized enforcement.
Okay, so what is the argument for keeping it? Because I don't see it.
The argument in favor of maintaining citizens' arrest laws is essentially the Good Samaritan defense. Proponents argue it empowers communities to stop crimes in progress.
I guess if someone is being assaulted, you want people to step in.
Right. Particularly in situations where waiting for police might result in immediate, irreversible physical harm to a victim or the escape of a highly dangerous individual.
I understand the instinct to protect your neighbor. I really do.
Yeah.
But the counter-argument just seems overwhelming.
It is very strong.
Everyday citizens don't have de-escalation training. They don't understand the legal thresholds for the use of force.
And crucially, they lack accountability.
Right.
When a police officer makes an arrest, there is, ideally, at least a structure of constitutional law, body cameras, departmental policy, and judicial review governing their actions.
Yes. But when a random citizen tackles someone on the sidewalk, none of those guardrails exist.
None. The margin for mistaken assumptions is massive.
And what happens when those mistaken assumptions are fueled by implicit bias? This isn't just theoretical.
Well, it's very real.
We have seen horrific, real-world examples where an individual's suspicion is deeply rooted in racial profiling.
Sadly, yes.
Someone sees a person of a certain demographic walking through their neighborhood. Their internalized bias classifies that person as abnormal or dangerous, and they attempt a citizen's arrest.
Well, and the results are almost always catastrophic. It leads to unjustified violence and vigilante justice.
So for you listening, I want to point out that this debate perfectly illustrates the essay's core tension.
Yeah, between personal initiative or civic engagement and the absolute need for institutional accountability and due process.
Exactly. A society needs engaged citizens, but a society literally cannot survive if untrained individuals are acting as judge, jury, and physical enforcer on the street.
It just leads to chaos.
It really emphasizes how dangerous it is when the mechanisms of control, whether it's the invisible normalization of the Panopticon or the physical enforcement of a citizen's arrest, are infected with prejudice.
Yes. Which brings us to a much darker reality explored in the essay.
Right, because what happens when these powerful systems of social control are not just accidentally biased, but are purposefully, structurally directed to oppress vulnerable, marginalized groups?
It's a very heavy shift in the text. The source tackles this by examining the history and mechanics of deep-rooted homophobia.
And it makes a really vital distinction here.
It does not define homophobia merely as an interpersonal issue, like just one person harboring hostility toward another.
Right.
It examines it as a systemic, institutionalized phenomenon.
And that distinction changes everything. Because if it's just individual bigotry, you can try to solve it by educating that specific person.
Yes.
But if it's systemic, it means the prejudice is literally built into the architecture of the society. It's reinforced across generations by cultural traditions, religions, and political structures.
And historically, it was deeply built in. The essay notes how many societies impose severe, legally codified restrictions on same-sex relationships across generations.
But why? To understand why institutions did this, we have to look back at Foucault's idea of normalization.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. What's fascinating here is how understanding this as a systemic phenomenon explains the why. Historical institutions, whether they were monarchies focused on producing heirs or agrarian economies focused on family labor, they required rigid gender roles.
They needed traditional family structures to maintain their economic and political stability.
Right. So anyone whose existence challenged that strict reproductive family structure was classified as a threat to the social order itself.
So homophobia wasn't just random animosity, it was a tool of statecraft. It was social control.
Exactly. The hostility directed toward lesbian, gay, and bisexual individuals was sustained and reinforced by cultural traditions, religious interpretations, and the literal legal code.
The institutions defined what was normal, and they rigorously policed the boundaries.
Rigorously.
The text details the consequences of this systemic exclusion, and it's just a devastating lesson.
It really is.
We are talking about profound social isolation, economic disenfranchisement, severe impacts on mental health, and the constant everyday threat to personal safety.
When the law itself views you as an aberration, you are entirely locked out of civic life.
Which reveals a hard truth about social change, which the source emphasizes. Understanding this as a systemic issue proves that individual goodwill is insufficient.
Right. You can live in a neighborhood full of kind, tolerant people, but if the legal framework of your country or the policies of your healthcare system or the curriculum of your educational institutions still discriminate,
the oppression remains fully active.
True change requires institutional reform and public dialogue. It requires dismantling the actual mechanisms of control.
And nowhere is that collision between institutional reform and deep-rooted ideology more intense than in the debate over conversion therapy.
This is a huge part of the essay.
It is. Now, before we dive into this specific part of the deep dive, I want to be very, very clear with you, the listener.
Yes, important caveat here.
We are impartially reporting the viewpoints presented in the source material without endorsing either side. The sources contain politically and socially charged content, and we are not taking any sides. We are simply conveying the ideas contained in the original text.
Exactly. We are just analyzing the arguments as presented.
Okay, so with that said, the source material addresses this practice directly. It defines conversion therapy as interventions intended to change or suppress a person's sexual orientation or gender identity.
Which is perhaps the ultimate, most literal application of Foucault's concept of normalization.
Wow, yes.
It is a targeted intervention to force an individual back into the institutionally preferred baseline.
Right. The essay lays out the current landscape of this debate, and it's a profound collision of competing rights. So let's break down the arguments supporting government bans first.
Okay. To understand the momentum behind the movement to ban these practices, we have to look at the medical consensus outlined in the text. The text references major global health authorities, including the American Psychological Association and the World Health Organization.
Okay, and what do those organizations say?
The clinical evaluations from these bodies are unambiguous. They conclude that conversion therapy lacks scientific support, meaning it does not actually achieve its stated goal of changing orientation.
Right.
And, more critically, they conclude that it causes severe, lasting psychological harm.
The trauma documented in the text is intense. It includes chronic anxiety, profound depression, deeply internalized shame, and a significantly increased risk of severe psychological distress.
Especially when these practices are applied to vulnerable minors who cannot consent.
Right. So based on those medical findings, the argument for government bans is rooted in the state's fundamental duty of care.
Exactly. Ban supporters view this as governments protecting vulnerable minors and upholding human rights.
From this viewpoint, conversion therapy is a violation of basic human rights and professional medical ethics. The state must step in to dismantle this specific mechanism of control.
But as you mentioned, the source also outlines the intense resistance to these bans.
It does. And the arguments from opponents of the bans are not necessarily about the efficacy of the therapy itself, but about the boundaries of government power.
Right. Opponents of bans generally frame their resistance through the lens of constitutional or fundamental liberties.
Okay, so what are their specific concerns?
Well, they argue that when the state outlaws a practice related to deeply held personal or religious beliefs, it is overstepping its authority. They point to the freedom of religion, arguing that individuals should have the right to seek out counseling that aligns with their faith tradition.
I see. So it's about personal autonomy and religious expression.
Yes, they also raise concerns about the freedom of expression between a counselor and a client.
And the text mentions parental rights as well, right?
Yes, that is perhaps the most legally complex argument. Opponents argue that parents have a fundamental right to direct the upbringing, moral development, and healthcare decisions of their children without state interference.
Right. They view state bans as an authoritarian intrusion into the private sphere of the family.
Exactly. It is an incredibly difficult policy knot.
It really is. I mean, how does a democratic society balance the absolute right of an individual to exercise their religion and raise their family with the state's absolute duty to protect individuals from documented psychological harm?
Where does the authority of the parent end and the protection of the state begin? It's the ultimate crucible for democratic societies.
It forces us to ask, who gets to decide what is harmful? Who gets to define what is normal? And who ultimately controls the psychological development of an individual?
These are not easy questions.
No, they aren't. But what's really fascinating is how marginalized communities respond to this. When they face these massive systemic forces, whether it's historical homophobia or the psychological pressures of conversion therapy, they don't just passively accept the classification.
No, they fight back.
They fight back.
Yeah.
And they don't do it by just asking nicely for small concessions. They utilize a massive philosophical framework to demand change.
And this brings us to the conceptual core of how societies actually move forward, the framework of liberation.
The source material outlines three distinct but interconnected concepts here: freedom, dignity, and liberation. And the essay asks us to rigorously redefine what we think these words mean.
Let's start with freedom, because the traditional definition is pretty limited.
Yeah, the traditional negative definition of freedom is simply the absence of coercion. It's the idea that I am free as long as nobody is physically restraining me.
Right. As long as there is no law explicitly forbidding you from doing something, you are free.
That is what philosophers refer to as negative liberty, freedom from interference.
But the essay argues that this definition is wholly inadequate for dealing with systemic exclusion.
Completely inadequate.
To truly overcome the Panopticon, freedom must also include positive liberty.
Which is the actual presence of meaningful opportunity.
Yes.
Okay, the best way I can visualize this difference is the wheelchair ramp analogy.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
So imagine a person who uses a wheelchair sitting outside a public library. Under the definition of negative liberty, that person is completely free.
Right. There are no laws preventing them from reading.
There's no guard blocking the door. They have the constitutional right to enter the building. But the building only has a steep staircase.
There are no ramps, no elevators.
Right. So if there are social barriers, is it really freedom? In that scenario, legal freedom is essentially a hollow technicality. The physical architecture of the building denies them the opportunity to exercise their right.
And the source text makes the exact same argument regarding social architecture.
Exactly. A person may technically possess equal rights on paper, but if they face systemic barriers like entrenched discrimination in housing, bias in hiring, or the psychological toll of deep-rooted homophobia, that legal freedom is functionally useless.
True freedom requires the society to build the social ramps.
But building those ramps requires society to expend resources, right? It requires changing laws and disrupting the comfortable order of things. So what gives any individual the right to demand that society fundamentally restructure itself for their benefit?
It's a bold demand. But the answer the text provides is the concept of dignity.
Dignity. Let's break that down.
In human rights discourse, dignity is not something you earn through good behavior. And it is not a privilege granted by a government.
Right.
Dignity is the inherent, indestructible worth of every single human being, simply by virtue of their existence.
And the text mentions the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights in its references here, which is so crucial.
Absolutely.
That document was drafted in the aftermath of the horrors of World War II, and it is entirely built on this exact premise. The authors realized that if rights are just laws passed by a government, then a government can just as easily repeal those laws.
And classify certain groups as subhuman, which is exactly what happened.
Exactly. So the UN Declaration attempted to anchor human rights to something deeper than local laws, the inherent dignity of the human person.
And if you combine those two concepts, if you demand the presence of true opportunity, which is freedom, because you possess inherent worth, which is dignity, the resulting action is liberation.
Liberation. So liberation, therefore, is more than just political independence. It isn't just a historical event, like a colony declaring independence from an empire.
No, it is an ongoing, active process.
It is liberation from fear, from poverty, from exclusion, and from systemic injustice. It is the active dismantling of the Panopticon.
It's an incredibly powerful framework. But for the listener, I want you to think about this in your own life. Use this exact framework to evaluate the institutions around you. Do they expand human flourishing? Or do they unnecessarily restrict it?
That is a great question to ask. And what is truly remarkable, and where the essay makes a really fascinating historical pivot, is the realization that this framework is not a modern invention.
Right. We tend to think of human rights, systemic equality, and the rejection of social normalization as, 20th century concepts.
But the essay argues these ideas have a blueprint that is over 2,000 years old. The deep dive suddenly zooms out from modern debates about algorithms and conversion therapy and looks back to a first-century historical figure.
Jesus of Nazareth.
Yes. And the text makes a specific timely connection here. It notes how the Christian feast of Corpus Domini, specifically the one falling on Thursday, June 4, 2026, provides an opportunity to reflect on the historical impact of this figure.
Now, I can hear some listeners pausing here.
Oh, for sure. We've spent this entire time analyzing Michel Foucault, Bentham's surveillance theory, and constitutional law, and now we are talking about a religious figure. It feels like a massive left turn.
It does. But the essay approaches this in a really rigorous way. It acknowledges the theological impact, of course, but it grounds the analysis in pure historical sociology.
Okay, so break that down for us. What was the sociological impact?
Well, to understand the historical and ethical impact of Jesus, you have to understand the architecture of control in first century Roman Judea.
Set the scene for us.
It was the ultimate stratified society. It was not a world that believed in inherent human dignity. Society was rigidly organized by a patron-client system.
Meaning everyone owed loyalty to someone above them.
Exactly. Plus, there were immense wealth disparities and intense ethnic and religious purity laws. All of this was overseen by the brutal, extractive machinery of the Roman Empire.
So it was a society obsessed with Foucault's concept of classification, long before Foucault existed.
Exactly. If you were wealthy, able-bodied, and of the correct lineage, you were normal and possessed rights.
But if you were poor, if you were a sex worker, if you collected taxes for the empire, or if you suffered from a physical disease like leprosy, you were classified as fundamentally unclean.
You were physically and socially ostracized. The system demanded that you be excluded.
And into that highly policed, rigidly categorized environment steps a historical figure who behaves in a way that is utterly incomprehensible to the institutions of power.
Right. The narratives preserved in the historical text, the Gospels, consistently depict him doing something radical, ignoring the boundaries of classification.
The stories are entirely about him eating with tax collectors, speaking publicly with women, touching the diseased, and defending those who are about to be violently punished by the community.
Essentially stopping a lethal citizen's arrest, like the famous story of the woman caught in adultery.
Wow, I never thought of it as stopping a citizen's arrest, but that is exactly what it was.
Yeah. Now, interpretations of these actions vary. Some view them strictly through the lens of spiritual salvation.
Right.
But from a sociological perspective, particularly through the lens of liberation theology, these narratives represent a profound disruption of social control. By interacting with the marginalized not as outcasts, but as individuals possessing inherent worth, he was effectively asserting the concept of human dignity centuries before the UN Declaration.
He was telling the people the system had classified as worthless, that the system was wrong. He was rejecting the normalization of the Roman and religious Panopticon.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, whether you approach this through the lens of faith or pure historical inquiry, these narratives of interacting with marginalized populations illustrate a radical commitment to human dignity.
Which brings us full circle, right back to that incredible piece of artwork we described at the very beginning.
The split-screen collage.
Yes. On the left, the cold, sterile, mechanical surveillance state, the modern Panopticon, where algorithms classify us and institutions enforce conformity.
And on the right, the chaotic, vibrant, modern crowd pushing back, people holding pride flags, demanding the structural ramps of freedom.
Refusing the shame of deep-rooted homophobia and fighting for their right to exist outside the baseline of normal.
And walking among them is that first-century figure, illustrating how an ancient framework of compassion and justice continues to inspire modern debates about moral responsibility.
It shows that the fight for human dignity is a continuous thread stretching across millennia.
It really is. So to kind of synthesize this whole journey we've been on today.
Yeah, sum it up first.
We started with the invisible, internalized control of the Panopticon, how we police ourselves. Then we looked at the complexities and dangers of citizen enforcement.
The blurry lines of authority.
Right. Then we moved to the systemic battles over homophobia and conversion therapy, showing how deeply institutions try to enforce normalization.
And finally, the enduring quest for human dignity, inspired by historical frameworks of liberation.
The tools of control evolve. We went from the threat of the town square execution to the hidden observation of the prison tower to the invisible code of the smartphone algorithm.
The institutions will always seek new ways to classify, observe, and maintain predictability.
But the tools of liberation evolve as well. Our understanding of freedom expands.
It is an endless tug of war. We need order to survive, but we need liberation to actually live.
Exactly.
And that leaves us with a final provocative thought. Something for you to mull over as you close out this deep dive, as you pick up your phone, as you walk into your workplace, or as you engage with your community.
It's a big question.
It is. We're accelerating into a digital age equipped with surveillance tools, biometric tracking, and predictive algorithms that are infinitely more powerful and insidious than anything Jeremy Bentham or Michel Foucault could have ever possibly imagined.
The central power is now in our pockets. It's in our homes and in our cars.
Right. So, will our technological future inevitably force us into a state of perfect, frictionless, invisible, self-policing conformity? Will we become permanently trapped in a digital panopticon that we happily built for ourselves out of convenience? Or, using the exact ethical frameworks of compassion, inherent dignity, and systemic liberation we've explored today, will we find a way to subvert the machinery?
Will we use our unprecedented global interconnectedness not to police each other, but to finally guarantee the equal worth and dignity of every single human being? The underlying technology of the 21st century can be used to build a stronger cage, or it can be used to build the ramps.
The outcome isn't predetermined by the machines. It depends entirely on the philosophical framework we choose to apply.
It's the heaviest question we face.
But facing it is the only way forward. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the invisible forces that shape our reality. Keep looking for the central tower, stay curious, and most importantly, keep questioning the world around you.